Hello and welcome back to this series on Google Forms. Today we're going to look at how to create some questions, and specifically we're going to look at how to create short answer, long answer or paragraph type, multiple choice, checkbox, and drop-down menu questions, and the options that are associated with each. So in order to edit an existing question, simply click on it. It will come to life. You can see that I can use this to trash it, throw it away. I can duplicate it. I could make it required, so someone has to fill it out or they can't submit the form. And there are additional options here we'll look at. But for right now, let me change this from a multiple choice to a short answer. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to give this one a name of first name. I am going to click this to make it required, so someone has to give me their first name when they're completing this form, or they will not be allowed to submit. Now in my settings I do have additional options. One is I can always add a description, so I could give them some instructions. Please enter your first name here. And the other option that I have is data validation. So let's turn that on and take a look. Depending on the type of data I'm collecting, I can restrict the format. So to try to get data in the correct format or as accurate as possible, I can format this by saying that I would like text that is an email address, or text that is a URL or a website, or something that contains or does not contain something. Now in a field like first name, we want to leave it pretty open-ended. So this is probably something that I would require but not validate. The options just aren't here to allow for it. But if this was an email address, and I chose email address, I could give them a custom error message, like please enter a valid email address. Okay, but that's not the case here. So since this is not, I'm going to turn off my data validation, but I am going to require the field. The other thing I really don't need here in this case is this, please enter your first name. I think it's very obvious by first name what we want. So you can always come back in and turn off that description. Now the settings for last name are going to be extremely similar to first name. Actually they're going to be identical except that this is going to say last name. So I can save myself some time by hitting the duplicate button and simply changing that to last name and checking. Okay, yes, it is required, it is short answer, perfect. Okay, so those are the basics of a short answer form element. Let's try the next one. In this case, let's just try a paragraph. Paragraph is just an open-ended longer response. I'll just call that about you. And in this case, maybe I will give them a description and tell them a little bit about what I want. And I've gone ahead and completed that. And let's look at our validation options for a long answer. And the most useful one is this length. So I can set a minimum character count of, let's say, 50 characters and a custom error message of, we'll be very polite here. Okay, and there we have a long answer, an open-ended long answer type of question. Let's go ahead and look at multiple choice. Okay, as before, we have a description that's available to us. And we also have several other options. One, to go to a section based on an answer. Okay, so in other words, I can say yes or no, and then depending on what they pick, they could continue on a different path. And we'll talk about how to put things in sections in a later video. But once you create your sections, you can choose them here and have people redirected depending on their answers, which can be useful. You can also shuffle the option order, which is useful on a quiz, so everybody doesn't have the same order. It's a little more difficult for someone to copy off someone else's screen. Okay, so let's say what our options are. You're a student, yes, no. And you always can add additional options just by clicking on that space. Will be soon. And there's also this add other option, and if you were to choose that, it's going to give you just the word other at the bottom, but more importantly, if someone selects that, a little text box is going to pop up and allow them to give more details. So those are nice options. I can make this required or not. I can duplicate it. If I don't like it, I can throw it away. But those are the basics of multiple choice. Let's look at a new question called checkboxes. Now, multiple choice questions force you to choose a single answer, so I cannot choose more than one of these in a multiple choice. These are also called radio buttons. And that's by design. That's what they're intended for, whereas checkboxes are intended to be used when someone reasonably could make 0 choices, none of the things apply to them, or they could make some combination of multiple choices. So maybe they pick one, but maybe 2 of these things apply to them, maybe all of them apply. So let's try this. So I have previously taken, and we'll just put your core courses in here. Brains, data, viz, dev, stories. Oh, I realize that stories is not actually one of the core courses. I don't want to include it. So I just come to the right and I can X that out. Notice also that when an option is selected, there's this little icon over here. This allows you to associate a picture with it. So I'm just going to go to my albums and I'll pick this one. And it could include a picture, which could be useful, especially with younger students or with certain types of questions. But in this case, I don't really need it. Now, I could just add an option for none. And I may not need an option here for other. I have to decide if I've covered all my logical options. In many cases, it doesn't hurt to add this other. It just gives a student the option to give you some detail about something maybe you haven't thought about, some combination you haven't thought about. And those are checkboxes. You can shuffle their order. You can give them a description, of course. And there is some validation you can provide. So if I was giving them, telling them that they had to, which wouldn't make sense in this case, but they had to pick at least 2, I can do that here. I can tell them the minimum that they can select, the maximum they can select, or exactly how many to select. So I'm going to say, please select at least, well, let's say at least 1. That makes sense, because they have to select none. Any error. Now, there's a problem with this question, and you may have thought of it, is that someone can select none and some of these, which wouldn't make any sense at all. So sometimes the design of these questions is a bit tricky. Of course, if that were to happen, I would simply assume in this case that they had taken the courses and maybe they'd made a mistake here. You're always dependent on the accuracy of the person using the form or submitting the form. So you can design it well, and your goal is to design it well to minimize errors, but that's not a guarantee. And let's look at the last type for this video, and that's going to be a drop-down menu. Okay, so we'll ask for your home school here, and in this particular district it's school 1. They're just numbered. So we'll do that. And so I've gone ahead and I've added a number of different choices for that question. Now, some of you may ask, in a drop-down menu, occasionally, in some places I can make more than one selection. And that's true, but in Google Forms we're going to keep it to a single selection. The other question might be, well, can I just use radio buttons or the multiple choice option for this? And the answer is yes. They're single choice options. The difference is simply in the way that they're presented. So normally you see a drop down when there are a lot of options, and therefore you don't want to take up all that web space. And when there's only one or two, it's probably easier to have them be a multiple choice question. So if it's a yes, no, a male, female, or there's 2 or 3 or 4 choices, it's easier to keep them on the page where somebody can see them all without using the pull down. So, available options, again, would be go to a selection based on your answer, so we could set that up. You could add a description, or you could shuffle this order if you wanted. Let's come to the top. Hit the preview button and see what our form looks like. So first name, notice the red asterisks, and notice up here it says that these are required fields. The last name is also required. Here's my open-ended question, and it's going to say tell me more until I exceed that 50, and notice it expands to be as large as I need it to be. My multiple choice, my checkbox, and my drop-down. And that concludes our overview of these 5 form element types. We'll look at some different types in our next video.